I'll move back further so I'm not quite as loud. So where was I? Grants. So please, if you have a project, please apply for a grant. We want to receive grants. We have 2 young engineers whose only job is to review grant projects, and I want to keep them busy. So please apply. If you have questions about it, you can contact me. Diane has my contact information. I'm also on you can just contact me through Ecology, and you'll see my contact information at the end here. Okay, so I'm here mostly to answer questions. So prior to this, Diane spent some time asking people questions. What are your questions? What are you wondering? What's going on with the manual? I've given long, detailed presentations here several times about the manual, and so all of you should have a pretty good idea what's going on in the manual, and your job now is interpreting it and figuring out what we mean by what we're saying in certain places. And so I'm here to try to help you understand those. I have a few of them that where I was prepared to talk about. That's why I have a PowerPoint presentation here. I have to have something to remind me what to talk about so I don't forget things. But also, in addition to that, I want to be able to answer any questions you may have that arise while things are going on here. But since I'm standing up here in front, I want to make a couple talk about a couple things that are questions that we've received at Ecology, and I want to give you the answers that we've had for these issues at Ecology. And so the first one has to do with this great big box in the lower right-hand corner. This is the bottom part of the flow chart for redevelopment projects. So if you remember the flow charts, you go through the new development project and it says if it has more than 35% impervious surface, forget this chart, go to the other chart. Well, we're now on the other chart. And you work your way down through that chart, starting out with 2,000 square feet of new or replaced hard surface. And if you answer yes, then you have minimum requirements 1 through 5 for all the new, replaced, and area disturbed, land disturbed. And then you have another question that says, are you greater than 5,000 square feet of new and replaced hard surface? And that's this yes and no at the top of that. You're not going to know what I'm talking about when I'm pointing at the screen, are you? But the yes and no at the top of it, that's the answer to that one. So if you answer no to that question, you then have is this a road-related project? And what this part does, below that section, is if you look up here, it says that you have to do all the minimum requirements apply to the new hard surfaces and the converted vegetation areas. It doesn't say that minimum requirements 6, 7, 8, and 9 apply for the replaced hard surfaces. Right now, as of that point in your flow chart, you only have to do the work on the new hard surfaces. So if you are taking a site that's currently asphalt, and you're putting a 6,000 square foot building on that site, you have 6,000 square feet of new hard surface that you're going to have to deal with, but it's not pollution generating, so you don't have to do minimum requirement number 6 for that. And it's less than 10,000 square feet because you don't have to worry about the existing or the replaced hard surfaces on that project. So this is what we're doing with this at Ecology. Is our planning was this is to get people to do infill, to take existing sites and upgrade them to better use. And we're trying to make it so that you can make it with a little less effort on the stormwater. You may be more likely to do it as infill as opposed to going out and destroying some nice pristine forest just outside the city limits. Do you have a question? Not if you don't have more than 5,000 square feet of new hard surface. Okay, so I have more than if I have more than 5,000 square feet of new hard surface, then I may have to deal with it. But I have another question in here about the value. So there are cases where you can have a project where you have a lot of new surface, but you don't have to deal with everything on the site. You only have to, if they could take care of all the runoff from the roof and put it in the ground, they're done. Okay, they don't have to deal with that parking lot unless they commingle. Then they might have to deal with the parking lot. Okay. What we've done in this big box here is, if it's a road project, if it's not a road project, excuse me, so if you answer no to the road project, you're going to be going down this great big huge box in the lower right-hand corner. That big box, for those of you who can see that screen. And there are two questions you have to answer following the answer of no. And the first one is, do you have more than 5,000 square feet of new plus replaced hard surface on this project? And you probably do, because you've answered up above, you've answered something about 5,000 square feet. But the second piece has to do with the change in value of that project. And this is a change we made in the 2019 manual. And the change in value has to do with the fact that we believe that if somebody is doing a commercial project where they're doing a project and building something that's increasing the value of that site, they should have to do stormwater controls for that site and for the replaced hard surface they're putting on that site. But if they're not increasing the value of that site very much, for example, it's a parking lot and they're repaving the parking lot, so the value of that parking lot isn't that much greater, we're not going to force them to do all the stormwater controls on that project site because it's already paved. We're not making it, it's not being any different than it is right now. It's paved now, it's paved in the future, no difference. But if they've got a site where they're doing some improvements, we want them to do more stormwater controls. And so that's where we ask, is the value go up more than 50%? The question that we've broken in here is, we're worried about the area that you're considering being the area that you look at the 50% increase. For example, I'll take South Center Mall in Seattle for an example. If we're looking at the site, and the definition of site is the area owned by the developer, so the site for South Center Mall is all of South Center Mall. And if somebody wants to build a restaurant on a corner of the parking lot of South Center Mall, and they build a restaurant there, and you compare the existing value of the site prior to building that restaurant to the existing value of the site following that building that restaurant, it's not going to go up very much, very percentage-wise. So what we've done is we said, we're not going to use the site for that definition, we're going to use the project site for that definition, which is the area disturbed by the land, by the development. So that piece of the parking lot at South Center has risen in value because there's a restaurant on there now. So it's gone up. So that restaurant needs to put in stormwater controls for their project. In doing this decision-making process, we talked to a number of communities, and they said, well, what about schools and parks and things like that? And we said, oh yeah, we don't want them to have to deal with that. We don't want a school to have to put in a whole bunch of new stormwater controls because they built a new building someplace on that project, on their site. So we don't want to have them to have to do the whole thing. So we've broken this question into two pieces. One is, if it's for commercial and industrial sites, you use the project site as your determining factor for the value increase. For non-commercial and non-industrial sites, you use the whole site for your analysis. And we call schools, we're saying schools and parks aren't commercial or industrial in our definition. A lot of communities got caught up on this because they're saying, well, we think schools are commercial. And we're saying, we're considering it not commercial, and so use the project site definition here for increasing it. That's a change that we made in the 2019 manual, and it's going to continue on in the 2024 manual. It's going to be coming out soon. There's a piece in the 2024 manual that I want to talk about too, and that's dealing with 6 PPD. So one of the things we wanted to do with 6 PPD is we want to make sure that roads are being taken care of much more thoroughly. There's much more treatment going on roads. Right now, if you add a lane if you have a 15-foot wide lane or 30-foot wide road, 15 feet on each side, and you add 7 feet of lane to the new side, to one side, that is, you have that new there, but you're not increasing the size by more than 50%, so you don't have to deal with the replaced impervious surface. So you could tear out that 30 feet and make a replaced impervious surface, take it down to base course, repave it, it's now replaced impervious surface. You're adding 7 feet of new, you don't have to deal with that replaced. What we're doing is we're going to change this number in that box from 5,000 square feet to 2,000 square feet of new. And we're going to be calling it new and replaced. So you're going to, if you replace the pavement on a roadway, you're going to have to deal with stormwater controls. This is a 6 PPD issue. We're being asked to deal very specifically with 6 PPD right now. You all know about the dreaded 6 PPD that's hanging around out there, the skull and crossbones of the horrible poison that's out there, killing all our fish. Ecology is trying to do things with that, but the amount of information we have on that subject is very limited. So we don't know if our BMPs will treat it. So we don't know what's going to treat it. We're doing some studies to find out what's going on, but we don't know yet. You had your hand up. Not in 2019 manual. It will be in the 2024. Yeah. But that's why I wanted to explain it here today, to point out that issue. That's an issue that we get asked about that a lot. And so I wanted to make sure that was here. And so to distinguish between one thing I want to talk about, another thing, I throw a slide in there to let me know that I was done with that subject. Any questions on that issue? Yeah. There are two questions there. One is 6 BPD. We're saying we don't know what BMPs can treat it, but we're saying we need to add BMPs for roads. And the second one is BPD federal issue as opposed to a state issue, okay? So answering the second question first, the tires are a federal issue and dealing with the material that's been put into tires. 6 BPD is an anti-oxidant that goes into the rubber in tires, and it is affected by ozone more rapidly than rubber is. And so 6 PPD migrates through the tire rubber to the outside of the tire, and when ozone hits it, it affects the 6 PPD and doesn't affect the rubber in the tires. And so that's how tires last longer than 6 months, is because the 6 PPD is being oxidized into 6 PPDQ, 7 PPD, all kinds of different issues. So yes, I was at a conference 2 weeks ago in Boston, and we had people there from the tire industry talking about 6 PPD and what they were doing about solving the issue as well. But it's everywhere in the world. It's not just national, it's universal. The issue with 6 PPD here in Washington State has to do with the salmon. Coho that are not getting to the Puget Sound, that the orcas are not being able to eat, and the orcas are dying out. So that's the 6 PPD issue we have here. Treatment, we are looking not just at 6 PPD treatment off roads. We're looking at TSS, we're looking at oil, we're looking at copper and zinc. So we're adding more treatment to roadways to handle those as well. We believe that a lot of the treatment BMPs we have we'll deal with the PPD part, the quinone part, the dissolved part we're wondering about right now. We think we have some that'll deal with that, but we haven't had it proven to us yet. We have a site, DOT built a site under the Ship Canal Bridge in Seattle, and there are 4 manufactured treatment devices undergoing testing right now, and we're running 6 PPD tests through all of those. So we'll have an idea about what those can do another 6 months or so. But our permit is coming out more quicker than that. So we can't put something specific about you have to use this BMP to handle 6 PPD. We're gonna have discussions about it in the manual, but we're not gonna have it fully. We don't have the way of saying if you're on a roadway you have to use this BMP. We can't do that yet, like we do for copper and zinc and phosphorus. Okay, so we're kind of we're still too early in the process to know what's going on. The legislature hopefully is going to give ecology about $5 million a year to study 6 PPD for the next 3 or 4 years. So by the time we bring out our 2029 permit and manual, we should have a good idea what's going on. And what we learned between the 2024 permit and the 2029 permit will come out. And it won't go into the manual, but it'll come out as additional resources attached to the manual so that you can use that as we're working on it. And we'll be publicizing that quite thoroughly. We're really working on 6 PPD a lot. Yeah.
So then when we talk to our
Yes, yes.
I just want to make sure that
Right. Yeah. Yeah, increasing the protection on the roadways is indeed something to not just 6 PPD, but all pollutants. And the roadways tend to have more of the harmful pollutants. They tend to have more zinc, more copper, more TSS, more oils than this subdivision would. So we want to have much more protection on roadways. And DOT is really working hard on trying to figure out ways that they can put more stormwater controls on their highways. There's not just the interstates, but all their roads. Okay. Okay, so I'm switching now to minimum requirement number 5, the on-site minimum requirement. You probably are familiar with the fact that we have 2 ways to meet that requirement. One is the LID performance standard, where you run WWHM and show that the flow durations between this 8% of the 2-year storm and 50% of the 2-year storm post-development are less than the flow durations pre-development. And you can use any BMP you want to use. Typically, you have to use some sort of infiltration BMP. Detention alone will not solve that problem because 8% of the 2-year storm is such a low flow rate, you can't empty a pond fast enough so that the next storm won't overtop it, and it'll mess your 50% of the 2-year storm problem. And so that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is your list option. And that's where you have if you only have to do minimum requirements 1 through 5, smaller than 5,000 square feet project, you have to do list number 1, and list number 2 is your second choice of that. And you're told that you need to go down through this list in a step-by-step process and determine if it's feasible or not. And the first one's feasible, and you have a list of infeasibility criteria. We thought it was easier to say why you shouldn't install it than why you should install it. And so if you answer no to the infeasibility criteria, it's feasible. And you work your way down through the list through full dispersion, past permeable pavement, past bioretention, sheet flow, and whatnot. And as you're working your way down that list, particularly for the other hard surfaces, ecology's view of this is that you can't break out each individual type of hard surface. You have to break them out. You can't gather all the hard surfaces together. You can't gather the patios and the sidewalks and the streets and say those are all hard surfaces and my street is infeasible, therefore I don't have to do any do I have to do anything for the hard surfaces? You have to look at each different type of hard surface individually. So if you have too high a ADT for permeable pavement on the roadway, you still could use permeable pavement on your sidewalk. That the fact that it's infeasible for the roadway doesn't make it infeasible for the sidewalk. You have to look at each type of hard surface independently. And much more than that, you have to look at the locations of each type of hard surface, because you could have permeable pavement could be feasible on the sidewalk on half your project site, but not feasible on the other half of your site. Now, we're not asking you to build permeable pavement roadway up to a point and then suddenly change it to infeasible and impermeable asphalt. We're not asking you to do that. We're asking you to look at those things and then have a conversation with the jurisdiction that runs that to find out what that jurisdiction is going to accept. The jurisdiction has the ability to say, no, you don't have to put permeable pavement there. That's just ridiculous to put 500 square feet of permeable pavement and 8,000 square feet of asphalt. That's not reasonable to do. But the design engineer should be looking at that, and you as a reviewer should be looking to see if that's been done. We had the environmental groups were filing appeals on the last permit on this very reason. They were saying, people were saying, permeable pavement is infeasible because of high ADT, therefore we don't have to use permeable pavement anywhere. And we had to explain to them that no, that's not the process. The process is you have to look at each type of surface and make each type of surface an independent decision as you work your way through. If everything's infeasible, then you've dealt with minimum requirement number 5. Then you still have to look at all of them. Okay. Any questions on minimum requirement number 5 or where I was talking about there? Yeah. Right. It's part of the solution. So what we wanted to avoid having happen is somebody coming in and saying, I'm going to be installing X number of square feet of permeable pavement, therefore I'm not over 5,000 square feet of new and replaced impervious surface, therefore I don't have to do minimum requirement number 6 and minimum requirement number 7. So we wanted to have that counted in the project-wide threshold. So it said, okay, now you've got more than 5,000 square feet of hard surface, therefore you have to look at all 9 minimum requirements. Oh, by the way, I'm solving minimum requirement number 6 and number 7 by putting in permeable pavement. Okay? That's the reasoning behind the hard surface. Okay? We did think that one out. Yeah, we didn't just make a sudden change. Yeah, hard is easier to write than impervious, so we'll use hard. Well, that's the list option, and the LID performance standard is to encourage people to use infiltration on site. And then that infiltration on site can also help with minimum requirement number 6 and minimum requirement number 7 at the same time. But our reasoning behind hard surface was exactly to make sure that it was not excluded. They couldn't come in and say, I'm putting in permeable pavement, therefore I don't have to do it, and then not put in permeable pavement. Okay? There's thinking behind these things, right? Okay. So one of the questions that was posed to me was, what's going on with wetlands? How do we deal with wetlands? The minimum requirement number 8 is wetland protection. If you're discharging into a wetland, you need to make sure that you're not damaging that wetland, and damaging that wetland by putting pollutants into it, or damaging it by changing its hydro period, how high up it goes and how low it goes as you're working along. And there are 3 steps of protection that we've got for wetlands. Wetland protection is governed by a different section at ecology other than my section, water quality, but we're working with them to come up with these solutions. So there's general protection, which is don't let high flows go into it, don't drive through it, don't allow people to walk through it, and those kind of things. I used to go golfing on a golf course that had a lot of wetlands, and I kept hitting my ball into the wetlands, and I couldn't go get it. I was very upset because I kept losing golf balls, but it was my fault for not hitting it properly, I guess. So that's the general protection set. Then the second stage is protection from pollutants. So what this is you need to make sure that if you've got stormwater, that you're completing all of the stormwater treatment you have to do before you discharge water into the buffer of a wetland. Not just the wetland, but the buffer of a wetland. The buffers are protected as well as the wetlands. So if you're putting a swale to treat stormwater, that swale, full design of that swale has to end before you discharge into the wetlands buffer. Or if you have some other treatment device, you have to have that done. Same thing with flow control. If you have to do flow control, you've built your flow control system to control the flows before you get to the buffer. So we want to make sure you're not damaging things. Then the third level is the more complex level, and that's the hydroperiod protection. And the hydroperiod protection we're asking for is maintaining the existing hydroperiod, not the pre-developed hydroperiod like you have to use for flow control, minimum requirement number 7. We're asking you to deal with the existing hydroperiod. So this involves running a WWHM for a third time to deal with the existing conditions, because we believe any wetland that's out there now is in balance with the existing conditions, and we don't want to change the existing conditions, and we don't want to make it go back to what it was before, because we don't know if we can get it back to what it was before. There's also a potential of having a problem with minimum requirement number 7 and minimum requirement number 8 conflicting with each other. It's our belief that minimum requirement number 8 is more important. So if there is a conflict between 7 and 8, you have to modify 7. You can modify 7 so that it exceeds the flow durations at some point, as long as it doesn't damage the wetlands. Okay, that's an okay thing to do. If we don't want you to damage the wetlands. We're willing to have that flow control minimized, because the wetland's going to provide flow control as well. So we're comfortable that what comes out after the wetland is going to be okay and not damage what's going on downstream. So there are 2 methods that we've described in the manual on how to deal with wetlands, and how to show the jurisdiction, or how to have the jurisdiction be shown how to deal with wetlands. And those 2 methods are appropriately named Method 1 and Method 2. We went to a lot of effort to come up with those names. Method 1 is a very complex process, and you have to have legal access to the site, because you're going to be doing stage storage curves on the site, and you're going to be going out there and identifying where the water leaves the site and where it comes on the site, and coming up with a discharge rate off the site. So if you don't have legal access to get on the site and do all kinds of analyses, you can't do Category 1. We've created a very elaborate spreadsheet that takes a WWHM input file, and you then copy the flow data into this Excel spreadsheet, and you run that Excel spreadsheet, and it takes data from that and puts it into another sheet and into another sheet, and it comes out, it pops out at the end. Good, it works. Or oops, it didn't work. So, but you've got to have access to the site in order to be able to do that, because you have to enter the stage storage discharge curve for the wetland, and very few people are going to do that. The second method just uses WWHM. You run WWHM to evaluate what's going on, and you get information on the flow the changes in flow levels in the ponds, in the wetlands, and you put that information through WWHM. You go to the wetland tab, and you have it come back to you, and it tells you whether you're exceeding or not exceeding the values. What's happening is very few entities are able to meet all the values of wetland delineation. They can usually hit it for 9 of the 12 months or 10 of the 12 months, but they have problems during a couple months. Either when it's really low, they have a storm in the time of the year it's really low, and they get too much water flowing into the wetland, or they have or something else happens. We're working on trying to fix that. We got our hydraulic modelers are doing all kinds of effort in trying to come up with something. We're also trying to come up with modifying the rule to say that instead of having to meet everyone, if you meet 90% of them, you're going to be okay. And so these are going to be coming out in our 2024 version of the the 2024 version of the manual that we're in the process of working on right now, that will be coming out for public comment very soon. And the permits that are going to be coming out, that information is going to be coming out then as we're going on. But we're trying to come up with a way of dealing with wetlands that it's more understandable and easier to deal with now. What's happening is properties that are available to build on that don't have wetlands to deal with are disappearing. And so more and more projects are dealing with wetlands, and so it's becoming more and more important to have a good way of dealing with wetlands. There is some new rulemaking coming out of the federal government that deals with discharges, and they're asking us to control runoff all the way to where it arrives in saltwater. So people that are inland that have a discharge are being asked to follow it all the way till it gets to the ocean or it gets to Puget Sound, and we are not pleased with that rulemaking that's coming out. We don't believe that that's reasonable to ask people to, on a 1 acre project, to deal with a 5,000 square mile drainage basin, because the amount it's going to affect is very small. So we're fighting that right now, but it's federal government stuff coming out. So we're working on trying to solve that problem as best we can. So plans are complex, and there are methods in the manual on how to deal with wetlands, and you do have these two different methods to go about dealing with wetlands as you're working your way through. So any questions about? Yes, ma'am. Are there situations where someone can remove water from a wetland? Turn it, make it not be a wetland anymore? That's reasonable. They can route it around the wetland as long as the wetland is still getting the water it's getting right. It's staying within its appropriate levels. You'd have to do a fairly sophisticated analysis on it to do that, but yeah, you could probably do that. I don't see why not. They'd have to intercept it before the wetland. They'd have to intercept the water before it gets to the wetland and route it around it. But they have to make sure the wetland's maintaining its appropriate, the levels it should have had before it started getting flooded. Not an easy process, I'm sure. Yeah, but I don't think there's anything against that. You'd need to deal with the people that at ecology that deal with wetlands specifically, more so than a stormwater engineer. I like to avoid wetlands whenever I can. That's why I'm happy I'm not a designer, I'm a reviewer now. Okay, we can get to another subject here. Oh, exemptions. One of my favorite topics. So exemptions to having projects that don't have to meet the requirements, the minimum requirements that are in the manual. And so they start out with, we identify some that are fully exempt: forest practices, commercial agricultural, and oil and gas field activities or operations. Those are fully defined as being exempt from having to meet stormwater requirements. Pavement maintenance. Some types of pavement maintenance are categorically exempt. The socket patching, small amounts of pothole filling and things like that. There's a nice little list of those that are categorically exempt. And then there's some pavement maintenance that are not categorically exempt. And those are specifically identified as removal to base course and replace. And that's now counted as replaced hard surface. Okay, replaced hard surface. So when you're going through the flow charts and it says how much do you have replaced or new hard surface, that's replaced hard surface. If you extend the pavement edge, so you go across the shoulder, you're taking the pavement, moving across the shoulder, that's now new impervious surface that you're putting across the shoulder. If you don't do anything to the existing pavement, that's existing pavement and you don't really have to do anything to that. And then if you upgrade, if you have a dirt road and you put pavement on that, or you do certain kind, there's specific identifications of different types of steps you're doing. But if you're upgrading the ability of water to flow across it, essentially, the ability to get water off it faster and to get more off, that's called new impervious surface or new hard surface. So you need to deal with those if you exceed the thresholds as you're working with those, as you're exceeding the thresholds. Now, underground utility projects are exempt somewhat. Okay, there are people that are doing putting in pipelines. So you've got a subdivision, and for building that subdivision, you have that subdivision sitting off the main road, and you got to bring water and sewer into that subdivision. And people are saying, I can break those into two separate projects. I can make the water piece and the sewer piece, I can call that a utility project, and I don't have to deal with stormwater on that, and I only have to deal with stormwater on the site that's off the project site. That's wrong. Okay, that is one project. So you're doing the work out in the utility, out in the street, that you have to take care of as it's part of the project you're dealing with. And when you excavate and put the pipe in and you come back in and repave, that's replaced hard surface. And you have to deal with that as replaced hard surface as part of your project. You can't exclude it. Now, if you had two projects where you come through and put the pipeline down the roadway and then come back later, a couple of years later, and put the subdivision in or whatever, you might be able to get by with two separate projects. But if you're doing those in one project, they are one project, you have to deal with them. The hard part about this is, how do you deal with the runoff on the roadway? You can deal with the runoff on the subdivision completely, but now you have the runoff on the roadway, and it's already, you're draining down to that point, and how do you deal with that? Well, you can deal with that by overdoing the stormwater controls in the subdivision. You're dealing with this whole thing as one project, so your WWHM simulation is that whole project. And so you might be able to have it exceed, the roadway may exceed, but the work on the project itself is extra and the overall doesn't exceed the flow duration curves, and you still make the treatment you need as you're working your way through that. But you can't subtract that utility piece out as a separate project if you're doing a big project. And we've had several people tell us that this is what they were doing, and we've had to tell them, no, that's wrong. You can't do it that way. So that's one reason why I'm bringing it up today, is we want to make sure that we're getting in front of that. We're going to be more proactive in our manual. We are doing edits to the manuals, and we're going to be more proactive in the manual to discuss this topic and make sure that it's no longer a loose thread that we're trying to avoid. So there was a question about soils and soils analysis and how you go about dealing with soils analysis. And so I'm trying to talk about what we have in the manual to deal with soils analysis. And if you are the person asking the question and you want to get more detailed, feel free to ask it today. But we have infiltration testing for soils. We have 2 sections where we talk about that, and one where we're characterizing the criteria for infiltration, things like cation exchange capacity, infiltration rate, what's the depth of water table. That comes in the site suitability criteria. We have to have the water table at certain depth. I'm getting old. I'm having trouble remembering everything. It's because I've had so much information come into my head. It's pushing stuff out, right? Let's treat it that way. But these 2 sections of the manual talk about the requirements for doing infiltration, for using infiltration as your method of getting rid of the water. So you can put water into the ground, but you have to treat it first, or you have to use the ground to provide the treatment. And so these 2 sections talk about how to go about doing that. How do you find out if the material that you have out there is suitable for doing treatment? What we have in the manual as our selected methodology for identifying if the existing soil is treatable is we use the pit test. And the pit test is very well defined, both large scale and small scale. It's a very involved test, and if you're doing a large scale pit test, you got a big hole in the ground. And if you have a large site, you're going to have a lot of big holes in the ground, and lots of big holes in the ground cost a lot of money. And so we're not saying that you have to use the pit test. What we are saying is you have to use a test that the local jurisdiction is happy with, because they're the ones that are going to have to say it's okay to build what you're building in accordance with the information you've given us. So if the local jurisdiction says you have to do a pit test, then you have to do a pit test. Ecology isn't saying that. Ecology also includes the soil grain size analysis for unconsolidated soils. That's analysis where you take you get the percent of different levels, different sizes of particles, and you multiply that, the logarithm of that value times a coefficient, and add up these whole things together, and you get a final value of what kind of infiltration you can get. We allow that, but that has to be for unconsolidated. So if you have clays, that doesn't work for clays. That only works for the less fine materials. And a jurisdiction can accept others. They can identify other methodologies if they want. We're not limiting you to the ones we have. We're saying that we want some sort of verifiable test to be done on the soils prior to using those soils as treatment for infiltration, or to use those soils for infiltration. We want you to find something that does that. And if you as a jurisdiction are willing to accept this methodology, we're not going to stop you from using that methodology. We are trying to find some others. We are working with, on our grant program, we are working with a consultant who has developed a flexible infiltration test method. Scott Kindred, working with the city of Tacoma, has developed a test method to find that's less onerous on the site than the pit test is, but it still takes some site analysis. But you can do it by boreholes instead of having to dig a 4x4 hole in the ground. So it's a lot less expensive. You can do it in a lot more places. And he's done a lot of studying and developed a process by which you take the information from the field and generate that, turn that and generate it into a process that gives you an answer on what kind of infiltration rates you're going to be able to use. He's using both infiltration through the bottom of the hole and through the sides at the same time. So and he's done quite a bit of testing on it to prove that it's going to work. We're setting up, if you are geotechnically of mind, They have submitted for a grant from Ecology to do an analysis of this, to get a group of experts together to look at this process and decide if it's worthwhile to be put into the manual and used in the manual. And so if you are interested in that, get a hold of Scott, and because they are probably going to be getting the grant to open the public meetings for that and do that analysis. There's another one that we've got a SAM, Stormwater Action Monitoring Program, that has a project. We're getting a project there to initiate stakeholder feedback on other potential methods to use. And if we come up with other potential methods, they won't be able to be in the manual update, the 2024 manual update, but they will be put on the same page on the website as the manual update, and the extra information that's going to be available to people. And we'll say you can use that. It's not in the manual. You don't have to use it, but if you want to use it, it's going to be acceptable. So we're doing some work to help people analyze the soils to find out if they are acceptable for treatment and for infiltration, because we really want people to put stormwater in the ground. Okay, we don't want you to keep it on the surface. We want you to get it on the ground on your project site. We're finding might be problems with that if it gets through if you punch a hole through the confining layer and now gets into the aquifer. But that's something that somebody coming after me is going to have to deal with probably, because I'm not going to be around that long, I don't think. We also have a BMP T5.13, soil quality and depth. If you're following the list option when you're dealing with your site development and you're following the list option, the very first list option has to do with on-site soils, the permeable surface materials you have on your site, and the one option we have is this BMP T5.13. It's the only thing we have for you, so it provides a surface to store low intensity rainfall on the project site. We have a specific specification for this. That's kind of redundant, isn't it? We have a specification for this, and people are finding that it's hard to meet that spec. And they're reporting back to us that how do we meet that spec? It becomes very complex for us, making things very costly for us to meet that spec. And we're coming back saying, we want this to do certain things. We want it to be loose enough so that low storms, the water is going to stay in that material. It's going to infiltrate through the surface and just stay in the material you're putting on, because we're asking you to put 12 inches of material on all the land that you disturbed during the construction, but didn't plant on, didn't build something on. So we want you to put this material in there, and so we want that to be there so when it rains, low intensity rains, the water infiltrates and stays there and doesn't go anywhere, doesn't run off. And so that's the objective here. And so our feeling is that if you can find some sort of material, while it may not meet the spec that we've produced, it still can do the thing we want it to do. We're happy for you to use it. We would rather you did that than not do anything at all. But it's up to the local jurisdiction to say, are we going to accept it or not? If you accept it, we're going to say good. We're not going to fight you on it. Okay? It's not something where you have to worry about ecology coming back to you and saying, naughty, naughty, we're going to fine you for that. We're not going to do that. We want you to put something there as opposed to doing nothing. And so we want you to find a material that's going to act as some sort of absorbent. Okay, it needs to be a sponge to handle our many low-intensity storms that we get over here in Western Washington. And so we won't be getting runoff from the site. That's the purpose of this. And so if you can meet the purpose, you don't necessarily have to meet the directions on how to get to that ecology has produced. So that's where we are at that. And there was a question about artificial turf playfields that was presented to me. artificial turf play fields are a very weird beast. Depending upon whether they're under drained or not, they are treated entirely differently. They are pollution generating. There's no doubt about that. They are pollution generating. We're finding that people are getting sick from being too close to the materials on the surface, but they are pollution generating. And so you need to deal with minimum requirement number 6 as a pollution generating, and these would be considered either new or replaced hard surfaces as you're putting them in, depending upon whether they're under drained or not. If they are under drained, let me go the same order I have here. If they don't have an under drain and they're going to infiltrate directly under the field, we're going to call those pollution generating pervious surfaces. And you're going to need to have some sort of treatment layer below them. So you're going to need to have a sand, 12 inches of sand below the materials that's there for the facility. So they're pollution generating, so you have to treat them before it goes in the ground, but you can allow it to go into the ground straight through the surface. If they are under drained, then they become impervious. They're pollution generating impervious surfaces, and you have to collect them underneath of those under drains and treat that water that comes out and detain it as appropriate to meet minimum requirement number 7. If it's going into the ground, you're meeting minimum requirement number 6 quite well, but to meet minimum requirement number 7 well. In order to meet minimum requirement number 7, if you're collecting the water, you have to put it through some sort of detention facility there as well. And we usually call it new impervious surface or new hard surface as you're putting them together. So that's all the stuff that I was informed that I needed to talk about. So I'm here to answer questions that people have. I've only taken an hour. If you want to get up and move around a little bit and then come back and generate your questions and get back there and curse me for a while and then come back and figure out what question you want to ask me. I'm happy to do that. I have a 2 o'clock appointment at the airport to talk about a problem they have out there. But other than that, I'm available to talk as long as you need.